Chapter 6. Seams. It seemed much less crowded in the canteen compared to breakfast. Entire tables were empty, and there were only a few people in front of me at the soup lineup. I watched hungrily as the cook filled the bowls of the people in front of me. A Polish prisoner, an Aryan, then me. The cook looked at my OST badge and set down the ladle he was using. He stepped over to the vile Russian soup and spooned some of it into my bowl with a different ladle. I looked down at my soup. It was the same as yesterday. Turnip and water, with maybe a lump or two of oats or potato. He filled my tin cup with some sort of hot dark liquid. Then, "Out of the way," he said, gesturing with the ladle. "You're holding up the line." I looked behind me. No one was there. I carried my bowl to an empty table and took a seat. A seat that faced the entrance. I was hoping that Luca might come in, or maybe Xenia or Katerina. "May I sit here?" I looked behind me. It was the Hungarian girl. If she was so disdainful of me being subhuman, why did she want to sit with me? "You don't need my permission," I replied. She set her bowl on the table and sat opposite me. She was wearing the kind of uniform that those nurses who separated me from Larissa wore. But this girl's was gray and frayed from many washings. Even from across the table, I could smell the meat in her soup. It made my stomach lurch with hunger. Why, in this whole empty place, had she chosen to sit with me? I looked around the room. I was the only one here who was younger, like she was. I took a spoonful of my soup and swallowed it down. When she took a spoonful of her own soup, I noticed what looked like a spray of fresh blood on her cuff. Where did she work? "You didn't take the train," she said. "That's good. Don't they come back here for their meals?" She shook her head. It would waste too much time. Workers are dropped off at different spots along the route. Some move rocks, others work in factories. They eat their soup wherever they work. Surely they wouldn't make Katerina move rocks. And could Luca or Xenia operate factory equipment? What about the rest of the children? I hoped and prayed that all of them would be able to prove themselves useful. "How long have you been here?" I asked, my eyes concentrating on my soup. 6 months. I looked up at her in surprise. She didn't look as smug as she had the day before. Her eyes, still bruised and tired, were brimming with tears. What was her job? "My name is Julie," she said. "What's yours?" "Lida." "That's a pretty name." She dragged the back of her hand across my face, drying the tears. "Yours is pretty too." A faint smile formed on my lips. "Sorry for being so mean yesterday." I nodded, swallowing down a spoonful of soup. "How long do we have before the whistle goes?" "Lunch is 60 minutes. She filled her spoon with vegetables and a chunk of meat. As it hovered in front of her mouth, she looked at me guiltily. "I would share this with you, but they would shoot me." I nodded. It was kind of her to say. I watched as she shoved the spoon into her mouth and chewed on meat, potatoes, and vegetables. How I longed to reach over and take a spoonful from her bowl. "Where are you working?" Julie asked. "The laundry." "One of the better places. What about you?" "The hospital." She shuddered, as if she were holding the weight of the world. There were some children from our group who were taken to the hospital this morning, I said. Daria, Tatiana, Olesia, and Katya. Did you happen to see them? Julia looked at me with a blank eye. She didn't answer, but instead methodically dipped her spoon into her soup again, then placed it in her mouth. I set my spoon down and glared at her. I asked you a question. She chewed her spoonful of soup and sighed. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Do not ask about this here." I looked around and couldn't see anyone who was interested in our conversation. What was it that Julie couldn't talk about? Is it as terrible as I've heard? She didn't answer, but from the pleading look in her eyes, I knew that I should just drop the subject. "Eat," she said. "This is the only break you'll have until we finish at 6. You still need to visit the outhouse, wash your bowl, take it back to your barracks, and get back to the laundry." I looked around and saw that others were quickly slurping. I shoved in the rest of my soup and swallowed, feeling some vile chunks of turnip going down whole. I held the bowl up to my lips and let the last brown drops drain into my mouth. Julie did the same with her bowl. I gulped down the dark liquid in my cup. It tasted different from the morning's tea, but was awful in its own way. Julie hastily stood up and left, as if she wanted to get away from me as quickly as she could. When I got back to the laundry, Ingi was sitting at the table with a piece of wax paper opened in front of her. On it were the remains of a devoured sandwich, a couple of crusts, a bit of mustard. She was biting into a second sandwich made of fresh, light rye bread and thick slices of roast pork. The aroma made my knees weak. How I longed to eat those remaining crusts. "Go change," she said, a bit of pork falling from the end of her sandwich as she bit into it. "Then start taking the laundry off the line out back. I'll meet you there in a minute." The sheets were stiff in the wintry air, and they were awkward for someone as little as me to handle all by myself. But I was determined to prove that I was useful. By the time Ingi had finished her sandwich, I had taken down and folded 4 of the sheets. She didn't praise me, but I could tell by her smug silence that she was pleased with how much work I could save her. My hands and feet were sore with cold by the time we got the rest of the sheets folded and brought inside. "Those need ironing," she said. I followed her into a room beyond the washing area. This one had a tall steam press that reminded me of a coffin with a levered lid. Was she expecting me to operate it? I would need a ladder to get to those levers. Along one wall was an oversized table, which I assume was for folding the iron sheets. Maybe I could pull that over the ironing press and stand on it. "While I'm ironing, you shall mend," said Ingi. Thank goodness. I took the stiff top sheet off the pile and spread it out on the folding table. I ran my fingertips along the frayed outer edge. Is it the seams that you want me to mend? These are all going to fall apart if they are not resewn. That's what you're here for. Ingi plugged in the huge ironing contraption to let it heat up, and then stepped over to my side. "It would be more sensible to do the seams with a sewing machine," she said, "but they're all in use making new uniforms for the war." "May I begin now?" I asked her. It takes time to do this by hand." Ingi got a wicker sewing kit out of the cupboard, small spool of thread in different colors and weights, a black velvet needle cushion holding several sizes of needles, and a small thread snipper. The kit looked too domestic for an army. Without wasting any time, I pulled a chair over to the big table and sat down to my work. I threaded the narrowest needle from the cushion and knotted the end of my long, white thread. I double-folded the frayed edge of the first bed sheet and deftly worked in a narrow chevron stitch, using the edge of my thumbnail as a ruler. Ingy stood over me and watched. "You're good at that. Tidy and artful." I nodded my head slightly in acknowledgement of her praise and kept on stitching. If I was going to prove my worth to the officer, I needed to have an impressive amount of perfect work done. The steam press had heated enough for Ingy to use, so she left me to my mending and began to tackle the folded mounds of damp sheets. As she worked, she hummed a melody that must have been German. I didn't recognize it. I stayed silent. I needed to concentrate on making faultless chevron seams. When I was finished with my first entire sheet, I stood up and stretched the kinks out of my back. Ingy took the sheet from me and examined each stitch. "This is fine work," she said. "It will look like new once the sheets have been ironed." She put it through the giant press, and I was pleased with the results. My stitches were just as I had wanted them, tidy, and even like a machine had made them, but with a pattern that no machine could do. "I guess I can trust you with this, then." She brought me the roll call officer's uniform jacket and shirt set and put it on the table in front of me. The uniform smelled faintly of tobacco and sweat. I threaded a thicker needle with sturdy gray thread and fixed the loose brass button on the jacket. That part was easy. Fixing the frayed collar without having the mend show was trickier, but I managed. Ingy snatched the uniform from me when I had finished, held it to the light, and carefully inspected it. "This will do," she said, and she almost smiled. "You can mend one of the iron sheets," she went on. "I'll run the edges through the press a second time to tidy them once you're finished." The iron sheets were smooth and warm and easier to work with. By the time the 6 p.m. whistle blew, I had managed to hem 2 entire sheets and a good portion of a third. I had pricked myself a few times, but hadn't gotten a single drop of blood on any of the cotton. My hands and back ached from the concentration, but I was pleased with myself. There were worse places than this warm, clean laundry. I had wanted to stay longer to finish the third sheet. I was so fearful that the officer would think I had worked too slowly. "I will tell them you are a good worker when I take back his uniform." Ingy tapped her foot, waiting for me to finish. "Now go. I'll see you tomorrow."